If you knew how many times I've had to restart this presentation due to camera malfunctions, you would feel very sorry for me. So I'm going to take it from the top once again. This presentation is about birds. As you can see, birds, they are everywhere. For some of my classes, I'm required to keep a field notebook in which I record my observations, oftentimes regarding large groups of small birds that I'm having trouble figuring out what they are. I write something like, oh, there's 20 to 30 LBBs. LBBs is a little brown bird, and they can be difficult to tell one from the other. A, because they're small, and B, they hop around, and they're like sort of in the brush, and they're hard to see. The problem with that is that that's not scientifically useful information, because if you're not taking that first step of identifying something, you're not really going to learn anything else about it, and what it does, and what it means. So, there's steps you can take to identify a bird, even when it's difficult, and we're going to talk about some of those today. This drawing is by a 12-year-old boy named David Barth. He is autistic, and what you see here are hundreds of different species of birds, basically one example of each. And what's amazing about this drawing is that you can pretty much identify each bird. Even though these are not particularly detailed or realistic birds, this contains just enough detail that you can tell what it is. Personally, I think realism in art is overrated, and that's not really what I'm into. So I really like this picture a lot. And I also feel like this is a little bit, I can definitely relate to this, like this is a little bit this is kind of what your brain ends up looking like if you spend too much time thinking about birds. I can tell you pretty much exactly when I started thinking about birds. For most of my life, it wasn't something I was hugely interested in. You know, if I saw a bird, I'd be like, oh yeah, there's a bird, that's nice. But I didn't really take it any farther than that. So one day I was walking to work, and I find this dead bird, and I walk past it, and I'm still thinking about it, and I'm like, that's a very strange looking bird. I've never seen anything like that. So I go back, and okay, it's got eyes that are like almost on the top of its head. Black, beady eyes. It's got sort of a chicken neck. It's not a huge bird, but it's not small. It's sort of large, on the large side. And it's most significantly, it has a long, needle-like bill, like a pair of needle-nose pliers. And I've never seen anything like this, and I don't know what it is. And when I get curious about something, I find it very difficult to let it go. So I actually ended up, I don't know, finding some kind of receptacle to put this bird in, and I took it to work with me. My workplace at that time, pretty laid back, but bringing dead animals to work is probably frowned upon. I just made sure my boss was unaware of it, but I did show it to a couple of my coworkers, and they were stumped. They didn't know what it was. But then one of my coworkers, unbeknownst to me, was a zoology major in college. So he goes and gets a field guide. He starts leafing through it and muttering to himself. I remember at one point he commented that it had a buff chest. And I was like, well, yeah, I guess that's a muscular bird. I'll give you that. He's like, no, that's not what that means. That means that it has a red, sort of a pale rust red plumage on its chest. And I was like, all right, I'm going to shut up and just let you do your thing. And eventually, he closes the book, puts it down, and says, it's an American woodcock. And he says that with no sense of irony. And from then on, I was interested in birds, because that was probably the most fun I've ever had at work at that time. And as you can see, it is a strange looking bird, and it's not something you'd expect to see in the city. It's a very like woodsy type creature. You're not going to find it in a metropolitan area unless it's lost. It was probably migrating and flew into one of the taller buildings nearby. So ever since then, I've been watching birds pretty adamantly. I'm obviously watching birds when I'm outside. I'll do it when I'm inside if there's a window. I'll do it when I'm driving a car. I hope you're okay with that. And I'll do it, I might be doing it now. If there are, I don't see any birds right now, but if there was one, I would look at it. So, most people can identify a few birds, the ones they see most often, such as a robin or a cardinal, and that's a great start. But what I want to do is give you some information about the steps in mental observation that you can make so that you can use a field guide or a website to identify pretty much any bird. So first we're going to talk about some of the mental steps in bird identification. Second, I'm going to give you some examples of birds that are difficult to identify. And after that, we're going to we'll walk through the characteristics of those birds and how you can identify them. So these steps in observation, you can do them any way you want. I'm listing them in order from least obvious to most obvious. The reason for that being that the least obvious ones are probably the most effective. They require the most legwork, meaning that you need to study this stuff and do some reading about it in order to really know these things. So the first thing we talk about is geography. This is the North American Bird Conservation Initiative regional map. These are different habitat types in North America, designated by their probably a combination of climate and vegetation. So what makes these areas suitable for certain types of birds? Now, this is just an example. Of course, when you're birding, you should be thinking much smaller than this, on a very, very localized level, and basically thinking about the ground that you're standing on at that time. Are you in a forest? Are you in a field? Are you on a hill? Is it flat? Are you standing in a parking lot? Are you by a body of water? Is it a river? Is it a lake? Is it a stream? Is it the ocean? These are all things that will help you exclude possibilities, basically. You also want to be thinking about what time of year it is in relation to migration. Birds are only in certain places certain times of year, so the more you know about that, the more possibilities you can exclude, making your identification easier. The second thing we'll talk about is behavior. You can tell what this bird is without even seeing any details, just by what it's doing. There's not many birds that do this, meaning hop head first down a tree trunk. If you guessed that it's a nuthatch, you guessed correctly. This is a red-breasted nuthatch. I don't think we see that many here. You're more likely to see the white-breasted nuthatch, but it does the same thing. So right there is a really good example of how behavior puts you on the right track right away. Not all clues are going to be that obvious, but regardless, it's very helpful. So when you observe a bird in flight, think about how it's flying. Is it flying straight, or is it flying like this? Is it gliding and not flapping its wings at all? Is it swimming? If so, is it diving? If it takes off from the water, does it go straight up, or does it get a running start? Does it perch in branches of trees, or does it hop around on the ground? Is it singing a song? Bird calls and bird songs are extremely helpful. They might even be the best thing, honestly. If you know your bird songs, you can often make 100% accurate ID of a bird without even seeing it. But that does require almost an immersive level of study, almost like learning a language, but probably not that hard. I'm not really talking about that right now, but it's pretty cool. So the main visual clues you're going to look for are going to be size and shape. And you want to think about your bird in a silhouette. Often, if you're in the field, all you're going to get is a silhouette, because if the bird is between you and the sun, you can't see any details. It's backlit, and you're not going to see any colors, you're not going to see any markings, you're just going to see a shape. And this gives you a nice little breakdown of different bird shapes. This is just a list of beak shapes and what the purpose of each type of beak does. That's definitely something you can pinpoint right away as an identifiable feature. This is a chart of different raptors in flight, and it uses both markings and silhouettes depending on what you can see. And there are definitely ways you can distinguish, you know, a vulture from an eagle from an osprey while they are circling around in the sky. This last one is a tail comparison. This is, you know, a really good example of where a tail is useful, is distinguishing a swallow from a swift, which, you know, they look sort of similar. This is a white-throated swift, which I don't think we have them here, or at least not many of them. What we usually have is a chimney swift, which doesn't even have this fork. It usually has a flat tail. So that's really easy to distinguish from the forked swallowtail. Then the martin's in there too, just for fun. That would be your main clue in distinguishing a swift from a swallow, is the forked tail. This is just a few examples of size comparisons. Kinglet, sparrow, starling, gull, hawk. Gradually you get larger. I'm going to give you like a lot more examples here. If you see a bird so small it's a bug, it's probably a hummingbird. You might think it's a bug. There's a golden crowned kinglet. I only included that because I took this picture. 4 inches. Not much bigger than a hummingbird, surprisingly. And the lengths were given here, I believe they are beak to tail. I'll have to double check that. I'm actually not sure. So getting a little larger, but not much. Black-capped chickadee, 5 1/4 inches. Cerulean warbler, I just included basically a random warbler. They're all pretty small. And this is a bird that pretty much can fit comfortably in your fist, in your hand. A little bigger than that are sparrow-sized birds, such as the purple finch and slate junco, 6 inches to 6 1/4 inches. That's like probably about the size of your fist or a little bigger. Then we get to about 8 1/2 inches, our gray catbird and northern cardinal. Good examples of birds of about that size. Then we go up a little larger, the ubiquitous American robin with his worm, and the killdeer, which are everywhere, really spazzy birds that you might hear more often than you see, but they're all over campus here. Blue jay, pretty much in the same size category, but he got his own slide for some reason. 11 inches. Mourning dove, 12 inches. American crow jumps all the way up to 17 1/2 inches. So that's kind of like, you definitely have different size categories, and there's not much between that. I didn't think of any examples between 13 inches or 17 1/2 inches. Red-tailed hawk, surprisingly not much larger than a crow, 19 inches. Turkey vulture, 25 inches. Bald eagle, 31 inches. Wild turkey, female would be 37 inches, male 46 inches. So that's getting to be a pretty big bird right there. And then probably about the biggest bird you'll see around these parts, the great blue heron, 46 inches. Snow egret's probably a little smaller than that, but any of these marshy type birds are pretty big. One thing that can fool you, birds can contract their necks. You'll definitely see that like a heron when it's flying, sort of scrunches up its neck. This is an American bittern, and he's got his head sort of tucked in right there. This is really what he looks like, 28 inches, and as you can see, it's a handsome bird. Okay, so our first example of a bird that's hard to tell one from the other, the downy and hairy woodpeckers, and the most obvious difference is size. Downy woodpecker is a 6-inch bird, so putting it in the same category as those, what was it, the junco and sort of sparrow-sized bird. And the hairy woodpecker, which is 9 inches, which is more like a cardinal-sized bird. They do have markings that you can distinguish. The downy woodpecker has little black specks on its white tail feathers. Hairy woodpecker does not have that. These are females. If it was a male, they'd have a red band on the back of their head. And on a downy woodpecker, it's going to be just one patch. The hairy woodpecker, it might be two, but it could be one. Downy woodpecker pitch is a little bit, the call was higher pitched than the hairy woodpecker, but that's pretty hard to distinguish, to be honest with you. Single best characteristic is the bill length. The downy, it's about 1/3 of the head. For the hairy woodpecker, it is about the same as the size of its head. If you take this measurement and this measurement, they're the same. If you take this one, you need like 3 of those to make his whole head. So that's a really good way. That's probably the single best way. There's a few other things too, but that's really what you need to know is the bill length. So now you know how to do that. So I'm going to go back to the LBBs, our little brown birds. I really stopped looking at my cards, so I'll go back here. First step in those little brown birds is often just, is it a finch or is it a sparrow? So this gives you kind of an idea of how you can do that. A finch is sort of a leaner body, smaller head, more of a triangle beak. The sparrow looks like that. What you see most often, house sparrow. This is a non-native species and is interestingly not related to other sparrows. This is the one you'll see pretty much all the time, like when you're in the city. I've literally seen these, found these in garbage cans, eating garbage. So his distinguishing feature is going to be this gray cap and his white cheeks. And this is the house sparrow, and he's ubiquitous and considered somewhat of a pest. But he's the first one we'll mention. They were introduced from Europe in the late 1800s, and they pretty much always live in close proximity to human beings. Song sparrow. Now that's a real sparrow. He's medium-sized, he's stocky, he's got bold streaking going on here. He has sort of a tail-pumping habit, favors open habitats in residential areas. They can be found all over Ohio. Chipping sparrow, as you can see, no streaking really, just sort of a plain white belly, bright red or rufous cap. Longest tail for a sparrow, small bill for a sparrow. These are all comparative features. Field sparrow, he's a little guy, short pinkish bill, round head, longish tail, little rufous line right here. Resident of the prairie will not go to suburbs. Savannah sparrow. He's medium sized. He has a small head, he has a small bill, he has a short notched tail, very small fork. Brown on top, white below, and he's got a little yellow spot between his eye and his beak, right here. These are a couple other sparrows that are less commonly occurring, but still good to know. Grasshopper sparrow, swamp sparrow, vesper sparrow, Henslow sparrow. Henslow sparrow you really don't see often, but they're pretty special. And it's good to know when you do see them. Someday I'll make this presentation maybe just like all about sparrows, because really you could just do that, and that would probably be more beneficial. So birds can be difficult to identify. They don't sit still. They are small. They're hyperactive. They fly, which makes it really difficult to identify them. Your best resource often is, besides the field guide or website, is going to be other birders. It's great to go in a group or just have some people that you can consult with who are experienced, and they can tell you a lot. Some people think of it like as a sport. If you think of it that way, I mean, basically the challenge is to get the most information with the fewest details. Some birds are difficult to distinguish because they look similar, but they can be ID'd if you know what to look for. So next time you see a bird, look at the size and shape of its Look at its size and shape, look at its color, look at its bill, its tail, look how it flies, think about what it's doing, and listen to its voice. And those things will tell you a lot. You know, I love birding because it can be done anytime or anywhere. So don't forget about your common birds, even like, Canada geese, starlings, pigeons. We kind of think of them as trash birds, who cares? But, what's great about them is they are easy to observe because they're everywhere. So whether or not you're interested in birds, birding is a great hobby that engages all of your senses. It sharpens your ability to analyze details and make you mindful and aware of your surroundings. It's a great skill, it's a great mental exercise, and being good at that will improve all aspects of your life. This concludes our presentation.